Against stupidity, we are defenseless. Neither protests nor force can touch it. Arguments fall on deaf ears. Evil always carries the seeds of its own undoing. It creates unease. But stupidity feels self-satisfied, immune, and convinced of its own rightness. And that makes it far more dangerous. Dietrich Bonhoeffer. What if stupidity isn't just the absence of intelligence, but something far more insidious? A psychological force that doesn't merely affect the uneducated or uninformed, but one that can hijack brilliant minds, compassionate hearts, and moral instincts. What if the greatest threat to civilization isn't evil people committing evil acts, but ordinary people who've simply stopped thinking? Picture this. A highly educated scientist begins spreading misinformation. A thoughtful teacher starts endorsing destructive ideologies. A devoted parent makes choices that put their own children in harm's way. These aren't malicious individuals. They're intelligent, well-meaning people who've fallen prey to what Dietrich Bonhoeffer called the power of stupidity. And here's what makes that idea so deeply disturbing. It's not happening to other people. It's happening to people like you and me, people we trust, respect, and love. This isn't just philosophical speculation. In 1961, psychologist Stanley Milgram conducted one of the most shocking studies in behavioral science at Yale University. Volunteers were told by an authority figure to administer electric shocks to another person. They believed the shocks were real and increasingly dangerous. Despite hearing screams of pain and pleas to stop, 65% of participants continued delivering shocks they thought could be fatal. These weren't monsters or sadists. They were everyday people, teachers, salesmen, secretaries, who temporarily surrendered their own moral judgment to obey an external authority. Their compliance wasn't driven by malice. It was driven by psychological passivity. This is exactly what Bonhoeffer observed during the rise of Nazi Germany. He wasn't just a philosopher theorizing in an ivory tower. Bonhoeffer was a German Lutheran pastor who watched his society unravel in real time. Born in 1906 to a respected intellectual family, his father, a noted psychiatrist, Bonhoeffer had every reason to trust in education, rational discourse, and human decency. But as the Nazi Party rose to power, he witnessed a disturbing transformation. It wasn't just the uneducated who fell in line. It was scholars, theologians, physicians, and clergy people with knowledge, culture, and moral grounding, who began embracing ideas and leaders that directly contradicted everything they claimed to value. They weren't being held at gunpoint. They weren't ignorant peasants. They were consciously participating in their own intellectual surrender. From a prison cell in 1943, awaiting execution for his role in a plot to assassinate Hitler, Bonhoeffer put pen to paper and wrote what may be one of the most chilling insights into human nature ever recorded. He concluded that evil can be confronted, reasoned with, or even defeated, because it carries within itself a kind of discomfort, a recognition that it is doing harm. But our stupidity feels righteous. It is deeply self-satisfied, immune to logic, and blind to contradiction. What's worse, stupidity is not simply a personal flaw, it's a social phenomenon. It often emerges in groups, under pressure, or within ideological movements. And once it takes hold, argument, evidence, and moral appeals become powerless. So ask yourself honestly, have you ever believed something just because everyone else around you believed it too? Keep that question in mind, because according to Bonhoeffer, the survival of civilization may depend on our willingness to answer it. How stupidity becomes a tool of power. Bonhoeffer's chilling insight. It creates unease, resistance, eventual breakdown. But stupidity believes it's doing good, making it absolutely immune to correction. Perhaps Dietrich Bonhoeffer's most prescient insight was his recognition that stupidity, unlike malice, actually strengthens existing power structures. Malicious people often know they're doing harm, which creates inner conflict and eventually collapse. But those consumed by what Bonhoeffer called functional stupidity believe they are doing the right thing. This self-righteousness makes them impervious to reasoning or correction. This isn't accidental. In modern society, the powerful no longer need to suppress information outright. They only need to make honest, critical thinking so burdensome and overwhelming that most people simply give up. Bonhoeffer wasn't talking about low intelligence or lack of education. He was diagnosing something deeper, a kind of willful ignorance, which today we might call functional stupidity. In his letters from prison, Bonhoeffer wrote, "The fact that the stupid person is often stubborn must not blind us to the fact that he is not independent. In conversation with him, one virtually feels that one is dealing not at all with him as a person, but with slogans, catchwords, and the like that have taken possession of him." That's what made his theory so revolutionary. Bonhoeffer argued that stupidity isn't just an individual flaw. It often emerges from systemic pressures that make independent thought difficult and costly. The truth is, many of our institutions, economic, political, and digital, actually incentivize stupidity. Social media companies profit when users react emotionally instead of thinking critically. News outlets thrive on outrage, not nuance. Politicians win elections with catchy slogans, not detailed policy. The economy rewards speed and certainty, not depth and deliberation. And when people are juggling multiple jobs, drowning in debt, and constantly bombarded by conflicting information, mental surrender becomes a survival mechanism. Economists call this rational ignorance, the idea that it's more efficient to stay uninformed than to invest time and effort into understanding complex issues. What makes sense on the individual level leads to irrationality on the collective level, exactly the dynamic Bonhoeffer witnessed in Nazi Germany. Worse, our own brains are wired to comply. In the 1950s, psychologist Leon Festinger demonstrated how cognitive dissonance causes people to reject information that contradicts their beliefs. And this resistance to new information only intensifies under stress, confusion, or insecurity, the exact environment modern systems often create. Bonhoeffer also noticed that stupidity doesn't always arise in solitude. It thrives in groups. He argued that it's not merely a psychological problem, but a sociological one. Individuals capable of critical thought can easily abandon it when absorbed into a crowd or ideological movement. This observation, ahead of its time, was later confirmed by Solomon Asch's conformity experiments, which showed that 75% of people would knowingly give wrong answers to simple questions just to go along with a group. Now, apply this to our digital reality. Social media algorithms create echo chambers where this kind of groupthink is turbocharged. A 2018 study from MIT found that false information spreads 6 times faster than the truth on platforms like Twitter. Why? Because misinformation is often emotionally satisfying. It confirms existing beliefs, reduces cognitive effort, and provides a sense of belonging. And the algorithm rewards this by feeding users more of what they already agree with, creating a kind of intellectual quicksand. Have you ever noticed how your feed always seems to show you content that aligns perfectly with your worldview? That's not coincidence. It's the architecture of chosen ignorance. It's by design. History shows this isn't new. During the Mock Salem witch trials, people weren't driven by cruelty, but by sincere belief they were protecting their communities. The Pa-Najal Red Scare of the 1950s wasn't powered by evil, but by patriotic Americans convinced they were defending democracy. In each case, intelligent, educated people abandoned reason in favor of emotional certainty and group consensus. That is the danger Bonhoeffer warned us about, not stupidity as a lack of intelligence, but stupidity as a system-enabled, socially reinforced surrender of independent thought. And that is what makes it so terrifying and so powerful. How to resist stupidity in an age rigged against us. Bonhoeffer's call to consciousness. If our brains and the systems we live in are rigged against us, how do we fight back? Dietrich Bonhoeffer believed that escaping the grip of stupidity requires what he called costly grace. It's the willingness to think independently, even when doing so is painful, unpopular, or dangerous. But now we know we're up against more than just peer pressure or bad information. We're battling millions of years of evolution and billion-dollar algorithms engineered to exploit our mental shortcuts. On a personal level, resistance begins with cultivating what psychologists call intellectual humility. The recognition that our knowledge is always incomplete and that we might be wrong. This doesn't mean doubting everything. It means deliberately seeking out information that challenges our beliefs, not to punish ourselves, but to test if our beliefs are worth holding on to. Here are 4 concrete practices that can serve as daily defenses against intellectual surrender. Practice intellectual friction. Set aside regular time to read thoughtful arguments from people who disagree with you. The goal isn't to change your mind, but to see if your ideas can survive honest scrutiny. Embrace productive ignorance. When you feel absolutely certain about something, ask yourself, what evidence would change my mind? If you can't think of any, that's a red flag. Slow down your sharing. Before posting or forwarding anything online, pause for 60 seconds and verify it with an independent source. That brief moment can interrupt the algorithmic cycle that thrives on emotional reactivity. Say, I don't know. In a world that rewards confident ignorance, admitting what you don't know is an act of intellectual integrity. It creates space for genuine understanding instead of false certainty. But individual effort isn't enough. We also need structural changes that support intellectual honesty and reduce the incentive for mental shortcuts. That means requiring social media companies to disclose how their algorithms shape our content feeds. It means funding public media literacy campaigns that teach citizens how to evaluate evidence and detect manipulation. It means designing online spaces that reward curiosity and humility over tribal certainty. And perhaps most importantly, it means addressing the economic pressures like unaffordable healthcare, housing, and job insecurity that leave people too stressed to think clearly. When survival is at stake, critical thinking takes a back seat. Bonhoeffer's theory was brilliant for its time, but here's what he couldn't have predicted: the full scope of the enemy we now face. This isn't just about moral surrender or political propaganda. Modern neuroscience has revealed something far more disturbing. Our brains are biologically wired to fall into functional stupidity. Bonhoeffer witnessed the effects of Nazi propaganda delivered through newspapers and radio. Today, we face something exponentially more dangerous. We've gone from top-down propaganda to algorithmic manipulation systems designed by artificial intelligence that know exactly which emotional buttons to press. And it's only getting worse. We're now entering an era of AI-powered deepfakes, capable of fabricating video, audio, and images so convincing they can rewrite reality itself. The threat is no longer just misinformation. It's a full-on assault on the architecture of human cognition. Our minds evolved to prioritize speed over accuracy, to trust the familiar, and to seek out information that confirms our existing beliefs. These instincts once helped our ancestors survive. Now they make us easy targets. The scariest part? No one is immune. No matter how smart, educated, or experienced you are, you can fall prey to these mechanisms. Bonhoeffer saw it in Nazi Germany. People who once stood for truth and reason crumbled under pressure. He warned that when people feel threatened or uncertain, they gravitate toward authoritative-sounding explanations that simplify reality into emotionally satisfying narratives. But today, those narratives are being generated and delivered by machines trained to exploit our every mental vulnerability. Every click, every pause, every like is data used to predict and influence your behavior with surgical precision. We saw this play out during the COVID-19 pandemic. Doctors, engineers, even lawyers, people trained in critical thinking, began sharing debunked theories about vaccines and treatments. These weren't failures of intelligence. They were failures of intellectual independence, brought on by stress, fear, and a flood of personalized misinformation. This is the world Bonhoeffer warned us about, but magnified 1,000-fold. So the real question is, will we surrender to it, or will we take the costly path of thinking for ourselves? Bonhoeffer's final challenge: how to think when it's easier not to. Dietrich Bonhoeffer paid the ultimate price for refusing to surrender his intellectual independence. He was executed by hanging on April 9, 1945, just weeks before Germany surrendered. According to a fellow prisoner, his final words were, "This is the end for me, the beginning of life." His sacrifice wasn't merely about political resistance. It was about defending the very capacity for human thought. Bonhoeffer understood that when people stop thinking for themselves, they stop being fully human. They become, in his words, puppets whose strings are pulled by whatever force happens to be strongest at the moment. This is what makes his final challenge so urgent for us today. Who stands fast? Who refuses to conform when the pressure to comply is overwhelming? Who chooses the discomfort of independent thought over the ease of comforting lies? Who speaks truth when the cost is higher than silence? The answer doesn't lie in intelligence or education. It lies in small, daily choices. Choosing curiosity over certainty, truth over convenience, and deliberate thought over emotional reaction. These aren't grand acts of heroism. They're ordinary practices that become extraordinary when the world around us stops doing them. The tragedy is that intellectual surrender often feels like liberation. Thinking is hard. It's uncomfortable to hold conflicting ideas. It's painful to admit you might be wrong. But Bonhoeffer believed that discomfort is the price of remaining human. In a world that profits from our surrender, choosing to think for yourself is a radical act. And here's perhaps the most uncomfortable truth of all. We're all vulnerable to what Bonhoeffer called functional stupidity. The moment we believe we're immune, we're already falling into it. The price of intellectual freedom is not just courage, but chatutium, eternal vigilance, or not against some external enemy, but against the part of ourselves that wants to stop thinking when it becomes inconvenient. Bonhoeffer's theory of stupidity is disturbing precisely because it's so accurate. We see intelligent people believing falsehoods. We watch educated citizens make disastrous decisions. We hear well-meaning individuals support policies that betray their own values. The issue isn't that people are getting less intelligent. It's that, Our systems reward intellectual shortcuts over thoughtful reflection. But within that bleak diagnosis lies a powerful hope. If stupidity is partly a choice, we can choose otherwise. If it's partly structural, then structures can be changed. If it stems from cognitive overload, we can create conditions that make careful thinking easier, not harder. Think of critical thinking like physical training. It's uncomfortable at first, but just as no one would expect to run a marathon without preparation, we shouldn't expect to navigate today's information landscape without regular mental discipline. The muscles of the mind, like any others, require use or they weaken. So here's a test. The next time you feel completely certain about something, the next time you're tempted to dismiss opposing evidence without considering it, the next time comfort tempts you into thinking you already know everything worth knowing, remember Bonhoeffer's warning. Functional stupidity whispers, "You already understand." In that moment, you face a choice. Will you exchange your intellectual freedom for the ease of certainty? Or will you take the harder path thinking for yourself, even when it hurts? Bonhoeffer's question was never whether we're smart enough to avoid stupidity. It's whether we're committed enough to keep thinking when it becomes difficult, unpopular, or dangerous. In a world where profit is made by keeping us intellectually passive, the simple act of careful thought becomes a revolutionary form of resistance. So here's my challenge to you this week. Pick one belief you hold strongly and spend 30 minutes researching the best arguments against it, not to torture yourself, not to be paralyzed by doubt, but to practice the kind of intellectual courage Bonhoeffer died defending. If your belief stands, it will be stronger. If it doesn't, you'll have learned something important about the difference between belief and truth. The future of human dignity may very well depend on how we answer Bonhoeffer's challenge. If this message made you question something you thought you knew for sure, that's not weakness. That's the beginning of wisdom. Share this with someone who isn't afraid to think deeply, even when it's uncomfortable. Because in an age that profits from our surrender, the decision to think carefully is the most important resistance we have. And here's what I want you to remember. Every time you choose curiosity over certainty, evidence over emotion, thoughtful reflection over snap judgment, you're not just protecting your own mind, you're defending the possibility of human wisdom. In an age of artificial stupidity, what's one belief you're willing to question this week? Let me know in the comments. Let's commit to being the kind of people who stand fast when everyone else has stopped thinking.